All right, folks, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Sarah, if that's okay with you? Okay, awesome. So officially, hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to the fourth and final workshop on mapping stories. Alternative methods, tools, and practices organized by the GeoMedia Lab at the Center for Oral History and Digital Storytelling here at Concordia University. We are streaming on YouTube live from Concordia University's fourth space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Fourth Space, we collaborate with our university community to activate the research projects and ongoing conversations and workshops across the university by co-creating daily activities such as today. So it's really our pleasure to host this roundtable with our colleagues from Codes once again. Squeezed into this small space. For those of you who are here in person, please take the time to make yourselves comfortable. There's extra chairs we can pull out. You can sit on either side of that table. And for those of you joining by Zoom, hello. I understand there was some discrepancies with the Zoom address, but you found us, so thank you for being here. I'll just let you know, just remind you, the folks in the space, if you'd like to jump into the conversation, please pick up one of the two handheld mics there on the table so that everybody on Zoom can hear you. And if you're joining us via Zoom, you're more than welcome to turn on your camera so that we can see you. And whenever you'd like to speak or jump in with a raised hand, we'll be able to see you and call on you. Okay, that's it for me. Over to your facilitator for today, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna. So yes, I'm going to share my screen to start this conversation. So yes, reflecting on the practice of mapping stories. We're really happy to have this shared conversation with all of you, which is like the culmination point of a series of 3 mapping workshops that was a part of the activities we're doing here at the GeoMedia Lab, which is a lab that is especially dedicated to mapping, to develop alternative mapping methods and specially dedicated to mapping stories. So without further ado, those are the 3 workshops we had in this autumn, and I'll let the other participants that are sharing this table present briefly their names and also the content of the workshop they've been sharing, and also the mapping tools that were presented in those respective workshops. So maybe we can start with, and maybe you will need mics because we're I'm seeing the mics on the table, but if you're able to reach one of it, yeah. So starting with Elise Olmedo and Kevin Pinvidic that were presenting on September 29 the workshop on sensibility mapping.
Hello everybody. We have 2 Zoom links, so I hope that everybody hear well. So maybe to say just a few words about our sensibility mapping workshop that happened at the end of September this year. We finally, what we did is we presented the method of sensibility mapping, and we worked on the story of Emmanuelle Kaiganwa, who is a storyteller who left her story at Codes during a project named Living Archives. So she's one of the storytellers of this project, and she really kindly accepted we work on her story for this workshop. So what we did is firstly listen the story and re-listen the story while notating something about emotions, strictly on emotions in the story. And we shared every stage after listening, after notating, we shared the results, our feelings, etc. So it was an initiation to this exercise. And I think that Emmanuelle will join us during this meeting, so maybe she would be happy to say some words about this work, because we work together in collaboration since like 2020, and we do a map of sensibility mapping, a work of sensibility mapping collaboratively, and we are digging this question of emotion, especially linked to the question of genocide against the Tutsis in 1994. So really difficult stories to tell, and we are now working on a subjective atlas. Kevin, I let you speak about the.
So we have some of the maps here. I don't. Maybe it's we can share it, and if you want to have a look at it, what we did during the workshop.
And for those who are online, we'll also have in the presentation some of the example projected.
So what I can add is one aspect of the workshop was to step by step create a sharing moment, a listening moment around the story of Emmanuel, and and understand how that process and sensitive mapping can help us to understand stories and different narratives.
Thank you. So this does give us a bit of context, and we'll have further time to dig into the specific practice of sensibility mapping. So in October 28, we had the special project that is leading Sepide Sharamanti and Yannick Baumann, which I guess is not here now, a project that you've been developing with the community of park extension, especially defending the anti-eviction mapping group and using the UMAP tool. So Sepide, you're with us. I don't know if you can share with us a bit of the context of this specific project you've been doing beyond the university.
Yeah, sure. So on October 28th, me and Yannick Baumann, Leo Daniel, and Emmanuel Guy, we worked on, we did a workshop on to introduce UMAP as an alternative tool to Google Maps mostly, and also as a tool for certain mapping projects. We talked a lot about anti-eviction mapping project, which is collaborative and community activist project in park extension with all the changes and gentrification happening in Park X. So we worked on this mapping project to show a rent increase in the neighborhood and also the community resources. But we also talked about the importance of UMAP for certain types of projects, including collaborative mapping, how UMAP could be a tool for certain collaborative mapping projects, for crowd mapping projects, how UMAP could be used for teaching in a classroom. So different uses of this tool. And we talked about different options that UMAP offers, such as it's free, it's easy to use, it's very suitable for community projects that they don't have necessarily a professional cartographer, or they want to make sure that the project remains sustainable, and it's open source. So with certain features of UMAP, we talked how this tool could be used for different types of projects. And we had some takeaways from this workshop. I think one important thing that we were talking a lot is that to understand why you're doing your mapping project, what are your data, and based on what you have, choose the best mapping tool. Not necessarily cannot be UMAP, it could be, but it's important to understand what are the criteria. And we talked a lot about the criteria of each project, and to understand what are the possible options, what are your criteria, and we are not doing think about the sustainability of your project, how you want to ensure that if it's a community project, it remains there, and certain issues like that. but we can talk about more details during the discussion, I think.
Yeah, totally. We will. Thank you, Sepide. So last but not least, this was only, I guess, 2 weeks ago. MRE. Oh, and I forgot to say, but this workshop was also presented with Léa Daniel, which is not part of the specific project, but also using a lot of mapping tools. And we might have the opportunity also to see one of her particular work. So yeah, 2 weeks ago, we had Emory Shaw and Sébastien Cacard presenting Atlas Ciné, which is a summary which joined a lot of testimonies from Rwandan people living in Montreal. So life stories that can be shared and compared through this online platform. I don't know, Sébastien or Emory, if you want to briefly talk about this project that is quite central in the GeoMedia Lab and that have been ongoing for a few years now.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'll start since I've got the mic. So yeah, I mean, I got on board several years ago with a master's degree, but I quickly got into the Atlas Ciné loop, and I've been assisting with the development of this tool for a long time now. And it started off with sort of an interesting exercise of basically trying to take stories and chunk them into pieces that are comparable, both within themselves and across separate stories. And that was a very difficult process, and there's a lot of, there's some work that's been done on that. There's like narratological theory about how to break down stories and so on. But it evolved in several directions, and the process of mapping with sort of an early version of Atlas Ciné then led to sort of technological choices that helped us develop the tool. And I don't know if we can show the tool right now.
We will show the tool, but
okay.
I do have it here if you are.
Well, I mean, it's worth seeing, so.
Oh, sorry. Oh, we'll show it just a bit later.
Well, so the whole idea is that it takes a story and, takes a story and places it on a platform where you have a map representing pieces of that story that are kind of thematized or annotated with colors and with themes that the researcher chooses to use, and those represent pieces of the story, and we'll see when we look at it, alongside a video of the storyteller and with a transcript of the storyteller. So it's kind of like this trifecta, this triptych, with sort of 3 different communicational elements that combine into this very widespread way of telling a story. I mean, I can talk more about its components and kind of how it works, but I think Sebastian would have a lot to add, because it really stems from a long process.
Yeah, thank you, Emory, and thank you, Sarah. So just to add on that, this is a software we've been developing, so it's not something that exists. It didn't exist before us, but we developed it with Carleton University. They do the coding there, but there are really 2 key principles here. The first one is that we keep the power of the stories and the power of the map. We just keep both. Instead of merging them, instead of trying to create new things, we really keep both of them. So the story is closer to the experience, closer to the body, to the emotions, and to the control of the person who tells the story. Once it's mapped, the control is lost because someone else has taken over and someone else has turned it into some symbol, some graphic representation. So we want to keep the story because we want to keep all these elements. But at the same time, the map is also powerful because it's synthetic, it's visual, it's organized spatially, and it gives a capacity to navigate in a large volume of data, a large volume of stories. When we are on Google, you type something, you search for something. If it's something related to a place, there is a map that will pop up. And the map is a way to organize data. So this is one principle that we use there, using the map for that. So we're trying to keep them together. So that's the first principle, keep the power of both things. And then the second one is making the relationship and the mapping process as transparent as possible. So to connect those two stories, you see the story and you see the map, there are some colors, and the colors is kind of the link between the two of them. And someone has decided that this part is important enough to be mapped. It's important enough to have to be on the map. So we want to make sure that someone, we can always trace back the decisions that have been made in this mapping process. So briefly, I'm going to add a couple of things. This comes from the history of the development of the software. It started more than a decade ago. And the first idea was to address issues raised by critical cartographer. The map is a powerful tool, but never acknowledge it. It looks like it's the representation of the space, the representation of reality, but actually it's someone making decisions in order to represent an interpretation of that reality. And it's been deconstructed and argued in many contexts. And so in the first version of the software, we say, well, we're going to try to find ways of making that more visible. We're going to develop a new way of representing things on map that will acknowledge this subjectivity and the power it entails. But over time, it didn't really work the way we wanted. And then in the latest version that you see here, we tried to reinvent the connection between the map and the data. Instead of reinventing the map, what we're working at, it's at the juncture, at the connection, at the interstice, the gap between the map and the story. And this is really where we think it's important to work. So, yeah, and the last thing I want to say, this is coming through the exercise, long-term exercise we started about 5 years ago of mapping life stories of Rwandan exile. I see that Emmanuel Kayiganwa is here, so I want to welcome you. Thank you for being here, Emmanuel. We've been working with those stories for a long time. They have been collected by the Center for Oral History in close collaboration with the Rwandan community. So members of the community have been collecting those stories. So what we've been doing is only taking those stories and mapping it, but there's also the responsibility in doing that kind of exercise. And this is also the reason why we need to be as transparent as possible, because we're working with stories that are not our story, that have been given, and with the mapping comes the responsibility of turning them into maps.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing this. So we had the chance to dig a bit more on the Atlas Ciné, but we will also have the chance to look at the specific project of a new map that you've been doing today. So now we have the chance here at GeoMedia Lab to have with us another colleague, Jose Alaves. Sorry, I'm trying to, oh yeah. So Jose, welcome.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm thrilled to share this table with my former lab mates, my former supervisor, in a discussion that is the core of my PhD thesis. My PhD thesis starts with a question that I believe it's something so important nowadays. What happened to a migrant when they die far away from home? So if we take a minute to reflect on that and what it entails, we can see that there are different aspects, geographical aspects, temporal aspects, that really trigger this question. Like, we can talk about the dead body, what happened with it. It is buried here, maybe in Montreal, or maybe will come back home, or maybe if the body is cremated, maybe the remains could travel to different points in the globe. But it's more than that. What happened to the memories? What happened with important mementos, such as a cup or a watch? What happens to posthumous ceremonies? And lastly, what happened with the memories that people has of the deceased? So if we think about that, if we think about how death triggers different geographies, which can be local, can be intimate, but also can be global. How should we articulate them? How should we study them? So something that I proposed alongside Sebastian, my former supervisor, but with the help of my colleagues as well, is let's try to map them. but not just map them with just one methodology. Let's use 3 of them. And let's see how these methodologies can talk to each other, can help us to reflect and listen in depth these experiences. So something really important, and it's the core as well of my dissertation, is that we don't have quantitative data. What we have is stories. We have what people said and mentioned about their season of one. So I mapped those stories. And what you can see, if you can check this beautiful slide that Sarah presented to me, are 3 maps that really try to entail different aspects and issues of the stories. If you see on your left, on the right, sorry, you can see the pre-mortem. Well, I want to go really fast. The pre-mortem travels of a migrant that traveled from Congo to England and then to Montreal. And then after he died, in purple is the posthumous repatriation. So it's kind of, how can I say it? It's this back and forth, go to the host country and come back home, which reflects this tension between host and home countries. In the middle, it's related of what my colleague Sepide was saying about memories in space. Here's a collaborative workshop that I had with a Colombian migrant. She and I mapped the meaningful places that triggered the memories of her dead father, and how, after we create this map, he shared the map with his family in order to mourn her father from afar. When she was living in Montreal, she used the power of digital mapping to share the map with her family, who's living mostly in Bogota, Colombia, but also others that are scattered around the world, for example, Germany or Mexico. And lastly, we had an industrialization which talk about not places in the global scale, but the intimate scale, because that is really intimate. It's really powerful in that regard. So when people talk about home, when people talk about bedroom, when people talk about church, if you reflect about that, in a story you don't have X1, X or Y coordinates, you just have a name. But there's a powerful relationship between that place, the story, and the meaning. So as Elise mentioned, we need other kind of representations that can really grasp the intimate, the ephemeral, the emotional. And at the end, if we put these 3 exercises in conversation, we have a tension between the ephemeral, the global, the intimate, and some stories that maybe will last maybe forever. So in a really fast nutshell, that's my PhD thesis.
Yeah, and you were happy to have you because you do had the opportunity through your research to really try a lot of different tools, which is quite valuable to be compared here in this conversation.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you.
So before, just to the setup the roundtable, we'll touch upon distinct question, bringing some reflection and comment that have been shared in the previous workshops. But before opening the floor to the specific question, maybe if there's someone in the audience, if you want to share a specific project that you're interested in, or a mapping project that you are working on right now, or a question that you have here coming in the roundtable, feel free to. I'm opening the floor to the audience in a way so that can break the ice, because you'll be, of course, always welcome to bring your own perspective in this conversation. So, but if there's a silence, it's okay. Yeah, we can also move forward. But yeah. Oh, we'll need the mic. Sorry, because of the Zoom folks that are with us. Yeah.
Just off the top of my head, I was just wondering if you had any ideas of making an accessible, practical application for like the public who wanted to use that in their process of grieving. Like, is that an idea that you have?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, indeed, I believe like that's wonderful because at the end, what I conclude in this part of my dissertation was how the mapping process, it's a way of grieving. So having something that can be applied by someone, I'm pretty sure is the next step of this part of my thesis. Right now, I haven't developed something that could be like as we propose it. It was mostly I was the cartographer, so I was accompanying the griever in the mapping process. But for sure, I believe that it will be so powerful if somebody can use the map by itself. Because the other part of it is like a map. Well, this software that I use is pretty simple, but still, technology is it's a wall. People is afraid of engaging with it. So yeah, I don't have that fully cooked, but it's in the top of my head. So thank you, it's wonderful.
Yeah, and also some of the tools that we'll be presenting as Atlasine and UMAP, and also this one of StoryMap.js are software that are also fully available and freely available. So it can be applied maybe to the method that Jose have been developed in his PhD. So I don't know if someone else wants to bring something. I'm seeing people between the structures there, but yeah. Okay, so let's dig. Oh, is there?
I mean, we can respond to this, but we can also just talk about it in the next section.
Yeah, as you wish.
Well, hello. Well, I mean, it sounds kind of maybe obvious, but when making software such as like Atlasine, let's say, there is a lot of importance, at least in this project, given to longevity and documentation and accessibility, and the fact that it's open source. I mean, a lot of, if we're really talking about mapping software and tools, a lot of the free tools over the past decade that have emerged online and stuff have either hit paywalls or have become swallowed up by, and so I'm just kind of driving home the importance of open source. I mean, this tool is intended, it's hosted at Concordia, and it's kind of structurally set up to last a long time, and by the way, we haven't maybe talked about it yet, but it's a pretty accessible tool, I would say, given you have the materials necessary to do something with it, and that would be a way of mapping something. I mean, Jose used it, so.
Yeah. Using Atlasine specifically.
Atlasine is what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for sharing this. Those issue of maintenance and open source. Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm not seeing everyone, so. Yeah, that's good. Be my eyes, please.
Hi, I just wanted to just say that, so I'm Maricia Fischer-Soin, I'm a postdoc at the University of Montreal. And the reason unfortunately, I'm a bit late to this series of workshops, but the reason I'm really interested in this whole program and the software itself is that I'm currently beginning fieldwork for my postdoc, which is a project it's called Mapping Immigrant Imaginations. And it's specifically focused on 2 case studies, so Montreal and Marseille in France. And I'm interested in North African migrants, so from the Maghreb region, and how they construct their own biographies in relation to their new places of arrival, whether it's Montreal or Marseille, but how they kind of construct maps of their own belonging, of their migratory experience. And I look at this imagination, or this is at least before I embark on fieldwork, this is the idea that I have of it, is that these imaginations or these representations of space and of the places that they've encountered and settled in are inherently relational and create like kind of a very relational and reflexive understanding of the worlds that they inhabit. And so hopefully, I don't know, I would really be curious to use this software and some of the other tools that you've developed to see how I can maybe use these to represent this relationality in the migratory experience. So yeah, everything here seems really relevant to my own project.
Yes,
Thanks.
thank you for sharing this. Maricia, is that your name? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's quite relevant, and it's also making me think a lot about, of course, José's PhD, and also CEPIDE, which is working about the intangible heritage of park extension. So and she's also using Atlasine, so you'll probably have a further conversation on those experiences. Okay, and is there someone else who wants to share a specific project they're working on? No, we're good. Okay, so why mapping stories? I guess it's quite a trivial but really essential question, and of course all of you do have a different answer to this question. But something that was brought in the workshop of UMAP, which was quite interesting, CPD, you were saying, while you were trying to map the evictions that are going on Parc Extension, you were also telling us that we shouldn't map just for the sake of representation, right? So, because there's kind of, especially when we're talking about difficult knowledge that are an inherent characteristic of stories, there's positive and negative aspect of mapping stories. So I don't know, CPD, do you want to share some of the experience that positive things and negative things that happen through the process of mapping those realities? And I can add up to that now you can see on the screen, it's a map of the evictions, but there's also another map that is the community map, which is presenting the initiative of the communities fighting for inclusion in Parc Extension.
Yeah, thank you. This is really related to an earlier point that was mentioned by Sebastian, that a map at the end is the work of the map maker. It's the map maker decides what to represent and how to represent it. And it really, it was an issue that we were dealing with the anti-eviction mapping project and also with my own project in ParkX. There's always this issue that when we are mapping, we are giving voice to certain issues, events, people, but we are silencing many others. So this is a very recurring challenge, like for I think everyone who is dealing with sort of representation. When we are representing something, we are at the same time we are excluding many other aspects. So, and it really becomes sensitive when you're working in a neighborhood in which you have vulnerable population, people who are facing a lot of problems, people who are always who have difficulty with the language, people who don't know what's going on around them, and there are all sorts of problems. And how we should see mapping as a way to represent some parts of these realities, but also to make sure that it doesn't have a negative impact, or at least minimize the negative impact on this community. So this was one of the main features that was really affecting us in the anti-eviction mapping project, and we were thinking about different ways to address this issue. Of course, some of the steps we have taken, we really moved away from the type of representing where evictions exactly happen. So we decided to change the location. So the locations that you're showing on the map are not like the exact location, but also how to ensure the confidentiality of the people who are getting affected by evictions. And also to make sure that this is a project that is really going on and evolving, not to be focused on a certain group or a certain individual, but this is about the community who are there and the community's needs, resources, and the changes. So to make sure to design the project in a way that it can go on. That was the case when we decided to choose the map and also to design the process. So designed a very simple process of mapping in which everyone from the community, from each group that we're working with, for example, a comité d'action par extension or anti-eviction mapping project, they can change the map, they can add to the map, and they can talk about the map. So there are all the issues that we were dealing, and in terms of evictions, it becomes there's also an important point that we need to mention, that for the evictions, when we're talking about gentrification and evictions, it's very, again, invisible. So there is not a very clear process that shows you, okay, this is eviction or these are the numbers of evictions. We don't, even the person who's getting evicted might not know if that's eviction, and the data are not accessible, they're not public. So the data is only coming from residents who go and make a complaint and think that they're getting evicted. So it needs to be really addressed and mentioned multiple times that what you're showing on the map is just the tip of the iceberg, and that's what we say in every session. It cannot be the representation of evictions, and there is just a partial representation of what's going on. And I think yeah, these were the main issues that we were dealing with. And also in my own project, like how can I talk about the stories and memories of people, about places, while I'm representing the place based on those stories, I'm also silencing like other stories that are I think for me at least, it's like a continuous dilemma, like to find a way that you can represent something, but also to make sure that you accept the exclusion that might arrive with it.
Yeah, thank you, CPD. It's quite interesting to make explicit those dilemmas, internal dilemmas, that sometimes when we don't just receive the image, we just have the final product, but there's all the internal conversation of ethics that we'll also talk about that is going on those issues of representation. I don't know if someone from the audience want to share about,
and just one point that I say that about the anti-eviction mapping projects, about any project and any mapping or collaborative project, it's just my reflections and my understanding of the project. We have different sort of people working for the same project, so their conclusions and their issues might be different. So when I'm talking about this project or any specific project, it's like my understanding of what I understood during the process. So that's important to mention.
Yeah, thanks. I see that we have some questions on Zoom. I can't really access to those questions, but maybe Elise, are you on the Zoom? If you're able, not this one, okay, because we have two Zoom. If someone is on the Zoom and can access maybe to the question that have been, okay, we can see them. So I don't know which was, I have read it.
Should I just read my question maybe?
Yeah, of course, Sarah.
I am having some trouble hearing. Sometimes I hear better, sometimes I can barely hear anything, but I hope you can hear me.
We do hear you well, yes.
There's one mic.
Okay, it was a question about, it was kind of like mentioned and discussed a little bit, a question about data stewardship beyond individual projects. And what are some scenarios and ways we can envision future uses and access and stewardship of the data? If we have a host institution, what does long-term mean? Is it 5 years, 10 years? These are questions I think are often asked by community members. Danica seconded it and said, also interested in how this data is findable by community and other researchers, I presume in the future. So it's a collective question for the round of experts here.
Yes, thank you for moderating the Zoom, Sarah. Yeah, so you're bringing, and is it a question maybe, I think it's related to Atlasine and also UMAP. You want to share?
Definitely in this context. Well, yeah, it's true.
Yes, yeah.
We've got two projects here that talk about, I guess, storing data for, in the anti-eviction case, for a community and to be accessible by the community and to be kind of constantly accessed and added to. Atlasine kind of has the same goal in mind. I can speak technically as to, we currently have a 5-year plan for storage and maintenance, and we're setting things up between now and March for things to kind of carry forward indefinitely, as long as things don't break and as long as there's a minimum of funding that can have someone to fix something if something goes wrong. But that's pretty valuable. I mean, that's when we're talking about, you know, the online platform of Atlasine, and obviously a challenge with online anything or cloud services is that you're storing it elsewhere. All of our all the work that you do on the platform we've made, Atlasine, is exportable in a data format that is mappable using other software. So that's kind of a recent addition that we're proud of and wasn't obvious. I mean, yeah, so those are all things important to this project. As for like how it's structured and so on, well, as I said, yeah, it's structured in an easily mappable way in using any other sort of mapping language, you could say. And the structure itself is based on the researcher. So in the Atlasine case, that is not Atlasine, but it's based on their annotation of a transcript. So the structure is derived from your own sort of interpretation of how the story is grouped and so on. And that's the most open sort of approach we have to what we were working with. There's obviously methodologies and like kind of well-documented ways of working with stories and how to break them down and so on, but that's up to the researcher who uses the tool.
Sébastien, you want to add something?
Yeah, if I may ask something. So it's a key issue, right? How the data lives over time. One answer is working with institutions. I'm not like doing any proselytism here, but I'm just trying to, like, people move, but institutions have a longer time frame. So if possible, working with institutions that have experience in archiving, such as libraries. And this is what we do at the Center for Oral History here. We try to have our data archived. We have them archived in the center, but we know that the library has more experience and longer term potential as well. So we want to work with them with that. The other question with the long term, so the tools change, right? We don't have much control. We don't like the code. We have to work with people who know the code, but the code may change. So we put in place some structure to make it sure that it can live as long as possible. But there's no guarantee. Because like if the code breaks, even if it's open source, you still need to have a developer that won't be able to go there, and it's not an easy code, so so you need resource for that. The other thing is the access to this data. So it's one thing to make it to archive, but how do you access it? And Atlasine has been designed for that. But some of the ethic relationship with the data may change over time. Someone may decide they don't want their story to be accessible anymore. So you need to be very clear in all of these projects that any decision made by the person who gave the story has to be respected, whatever the implications are for research. So research needs to come after, because if you don't do that, you may lose some of the connection and the confidence and the relationship you work with the community. So you really need to take that into account. And all of things make it like quite complex to maintain over time. But this is like the parameters we need to work with.
You want to add something, Sylvie?
Yeah, just one small point about generally the mapping project. I think, I don't know, from my own experience, is like not only the maps change all the time. We always say, like with anti-eviction, like when we talk, say maps is like a living entity. So the maps change as our approaches towards the issues and the problems that we're facing, or everything is changing rapidly. So it is, I think it's okay to understand that it might change. Even your approach towards a certain issue or a certain mapping project might change, and to keep the space for that change coming. So we need to understand that what we are considering as a mapping project or a certain representation, we might think differently in a month or in years to come. So it's important to always be flexible to give space to that change, and also, I don't know, for example, for the community project that we are working, it's also collaboration was also an important point that really, I think to a large extent, it can ensure the sustainability of the mapping project, and also, again, bringing different voices to the project. So I think effective collaboration among different groups, not to be really not to rely on certain individual or certain group, but also understand that maps change and the way we see maps change, and the way we see our own maps will also change in years to come. So that was
yeah, thanks for this precision. And I guess it's really leading, placing the context of my next prompts, which was brought by Yannick, which is your colleague, working also on this UMAP project of anti-eviction mapping. So Yannick, in this very specific context, said that the workload should be on data collection rather than on the tool itself. So I guess it was the conversation we're having. It's really setting the table of this idea of like the map being this ultimate stage of a work that is collaborative and that is done on the field really like in advance, which is really complex, and just finding the data in itself is a hard task. So this is really applying to those type of mapping that are implicating digital tools that needs to be efficient and easy to access, but and in a, I guess, more political strand in the case of your project, right? Which is we're using stories to make political claim, which is, I'm guessing, very different from the approach that have been presented by Kevin and Elise in the first workshop. So here you have a map, my own map of me participating to the workshop and listening to the Emmanuel Kayiganwa's testimony. So this is me trying to understand or listening at least to the story. So on this prompt of where is the work of the map? Like where should we put more in effort while we are mapping in the case of sensibility mapping practices? How would you explain the process, Elise and Kevin? That's a question that I'm bringing to you both. Maybe based on the, yeah, or maybe it's a way also to explain to the audience that maybe are not familiar with those practices, like, okay, how is it to produce a sensibility map?
Let you start explaining the process. I'll let you start. It's your... Okay. Yes, I have to go because I have a class soon. I was introducing to the process also by Elise in that sensitivity mapping, so it was my first experience also of sensitivity mapping, and I guess the purpose of that kind of workshop is to be part of an experience of around the story and building the collecting of data in that workshop was building through listening at the story and going by step in the understanding by the drawing process of what are the emotions or the subjective aspects coming from the story. So how we can build or rebuild an understanding of the story through that process of listening, and also that process of representation. So I guess that's one of the main aspects of the sensitive mapping.
Yeah, because as you can see, this map is really different than the previous one we debate and we talked about. Not because like it's a different tool, okay, that's okay, but also because it's a sketch. It's not a final. It could be a final map.
No, it's a sketch.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the status you give to your map. So it's a sketch. It's a preliminary exploration. This is shown as a result, and this is shown as a result because every stage of the research, every stage of the process, all these steps we followed I will follow as a cartographer are really important. They matters to understand if a final map exists, to understand like the results, the point where you went at the end. So this is like really different in terms of mapping perspective, and also in terms of archives. It's really interesting because we can this kind of papers we can archive it really differently. We can have problem of archives, but the question of platform can be relevant and not, because you can only put it in your office and it can stay for decades. So, but we also have this problem of digital archive, because this kind of archives are scanned and stored. So this is the same question and issues as other mapping results. But yeah, I came with Atlas of Sensibility Mapping. I made from the story of Emmanuel, and I wanted to share with you some sketches. So maybe, Sarah, you have a final map about, we choose for the workshop an extract about the first day of like the launch of genocide, the 7th April 1994, and we listen and re-listen this part of the story. And I did a map in 2020 of this, and I wanted to share with you also my sketches, because I think you have the final map, and I
don't think I have this
you don't
map,
have, okay, no
but
problem, no problem.
there's a camera here, and
Yeah, I will show it.
Also speaking a lot about the materiality of those maps that are not digital, and I guess it's a good thing. We'll try to, I guess it's this camera, but maybe in fourth space they will help us to make a...
Can we change and put this camera?
Yeah. And maybe the other ones can be passed around to the audience so they can see the work that it has been doing. Or do you want to? Can people touch? Yeah.
This can be considered as a final map, like a map, a version of the story of this extract. There is a much of light, so I'm sorry, it's not the right colors, but some drawings before. So I could only okay. I could only show you this, but if I only show you this representation of this moment, which is like it's described by Emmanuel as an explosion. Thank you very much for the settings. So she answered, it's really time-space maps, it's temporal, like you can see the beginning of the map, the story, and then like I don't go in details, but there is a line you can follow and it follows the story. So I could just show you this and say, oh, this is the emotions of the story. But if I don't show you the first sketches, like this one, this one. If I show you this, you can understand how it's a process for me to map it, and how it was not obvious to see like the ambience of the story, to catch the emotions of the story, because the emotions are not often not explicit. So we can feel it, we can see some some tracks in the story, but it's not explicit. So a work is necessary. And then the question is to find the right or a right representation about these emotions. And you can also, with this kind of sketches, you can also see like the turnarounds of the process. You can also see which are the abandoned ways of mapping, and in every tools in this table. This is their process, but in this case, it's more, and this is the advantage of sensibility mapping. It can appear clearly, we can talk about this, and a lot of cartographers talk about their process. It's more textual, it's more in the writings. So so about the process, I wanted to show you how it can be, but what is the issue with doing this? Why are we doing this? It helped to listen to the story and to put attention on some excerpts and to go deeper in the story. So we are not extracting some data, but we are more like going closer and closer to the story. And because, taking this time, it also create another kind of connections with the storyteller. So I did this. It was at the beginning only cartographic notes. It wasn't the idea to do a map of the story, etc. It was more like, okay, I listen to the story, I connect with the emotion of the storytellers. I also have a conscience of my emotions and to differentiate it. And then from this, we launched a collaboration with Emmanuel, who is here. And I had this amazing opportunity to exchange about the emotions I catch in the story. And because of this, we came much more, je sais pas l'exprimer en anglais, on est allé beaucoup plus loin que prévu. So yeah, this is more a starting of collaboration than a result, finally. Even if there is some like temporary results and final documents. Voilà.
Yeah, I really know that this idea of that every step of the research matters, and this idea of going deeper in listening and then to really open a door where there's you notice all your own biases and positionality while you're listening to the story, and this is part of the complexity, but also the speciality of those type of listening practice, I guess. So I saw that Léa Deniel, who's also part of the GeoMedia Lab, raised her hand. In the Zoom. I don't know if it's real or not. Léa, if you want to join the conversation, we're happy to have you with us. And if
I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I still have awful connection problems at home. I'm actually zooming in from my phone, which is why I won't be sharing my video. I'm sorry about this, but I hear you and follow you very well. I guess I just wanted to react to the overall question and to Elise as well. So the overall question is, where is the emphasis, right? Is it data collection? Is it the tool? Where do we listen? Where do we listen to a story? Is it through the data collection process, or is it in the process of mapping it? And personally, for my work, that is mapping the dispossession of the Kanyangihanga in Ganisatage, the listening really happened through the data collection process because the data were very difficult to access. They were not publicly available. So it's in the process of searching through, sifting through these data. I think you can actually show the other slides, the one that showed the land registry and so forth, that I sort of realized what had happened in the history. So it's by piecing it back together that I was able to see the bigger picture. So each lot is like a piece of the story that I was searching for, and so yeah, I really felt like I was seeing something very vague that was becoming more clear and more clear. And of course, this data was not all at the same place. So I had to also engage discussions with archivists. I had to talk to institutions. I finally met the religious order that held some data and had discussions with them. So the data collection process engaged listening practices with many institutions that were involved in this broader history. And so, yeah, I guess that's my point, that the data collection is a very big part of the mapping process, especially for this kind of archival work.
Yeah, and that's a very long process of archive you've been doing, Leah, and it's interesting. And we have the comparison of sensibility mapping, which is just listening to one fragment of a story, which just like the scale is just big. And I guess having those two methods in parallel help us to understand all the limits and the infinite possibilities of representation, right? So thanks for sharing this. Sébastien, do you have a mic you want to share?
Juste pour revenir un petit peu sur le... sorry, I'm not switching to French, but je veux juste, Emmanuel, si vous voulez intervenir à n'importe quel moment, sentez-vous très à l'aise. Mais juste pour... I just want to come back to both points, like with the Atlas of Modern Stories, the Atlas Ciné, and we work with that with Elise. The Atlas Ciné is really scratching the surface somehow. We can tackle a lot of stories and we can map a lot of them, we can connect them, but we don't really go into the depth of the story. You can go and listen to it. It always gives you the opportunity to listen. So what we were saying is that we map the skin of the story, where we can map a lot. But with sensibility mapping, you go in depth, you map the guts. And this is something that resonates also with Emmanuel when we talk with her, like this notion of, you don't go, the surface is smaller, you don't reach out to a bigger audience because it's more complex to understand, but you really take the time to focus on some moments and you go in depth into those moments. And we really see a value of combining those different approaches because none of them can cover everything. And so you need to bring them together. And I think this is the idea of this series and this moment, just to really emphasize the importance of combining and knowing and being aware of the multiplicity and the capacity of each of those techniques to go deeper if you want.
Yeah, thanks for summarizing this. Maybe while Emmanuel is taking a seat, I guess it's leading to the further question of making choice, because when we're mapping, we're always making choice, and as CPD was bringing it at the very beginning too. So the idea of transparency and the choice you make and your own subjectivity in the mapping process is quite an important ethical question, right? And that's why in the case of Atlas Ciné, there's this idea of transparency. All the coding and all the choices that are made are represented and can be traceable in the platform. So I would like to bring a quote from Flandrine, who's with us, also part of the Geomedia Lab, and coming from the INRS, doing a PhD on memory of dispossession in Mirabel, related to the airport construction. And so Flandrine was in the last workshop we had on Atlas Ciné, was bringing a very good question that I guess synthesize all those problematic of choice in the mapping process. So if I want to place, for example, my home on a map, and especially on the case of Atlas Ciné, which allows you to place a point on a map, but also tag a subject as a theme. So if I want to map my home, is it a theme or is it a place? So I don't know, that's a question also that it's related to Atlas Ciné, but also speaks a lot about the research of Jose that you were doing, because especially in the context of migration, this idea of home becomes quite complex, right? Home is it's more of a tension, as you tell me, than a very specific place, though. So I don't want do you want to share about this, how you've been dealing with the concept of home in your own research? Oh yeah, we'll let you. And I'm taking the opportunity to show a map, a sensibility map that Jose have been doing. You can also talk about this map if you want.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Maybe you can come back to the map, at the last name map, because in a way, what is natural for us to think is home. It's a point in the map, right? It could be. I want to talk about me. It could be Mexico City. It could be the home of my parents. It could be my apartment in Montreal, a point. But in the context of migration or death in the context of migration, it's I felt at some points it's not a team or a place. It's the map itself, right? So. And maybe that bridges of what Sebastian was trying to say, not say it correctly. What sense is that? Is like you can see the point, but if you go deeper, and then if we jump to the
sure,
perfect, and then you go in depth, you can see that home represents many things, and it's not new. It's something that Gaston Bachelard talked about. But for example, in this part of the interview of somebody who lost a friend at home, I noticed that what home meant for a storyteller changes in a matter of hours. At first, if you see the industrialization, you will see a semicircle, which represents everyday life. And the storyteller tell it as it is. He talked about hours, measured. He talked about at 10 p.m. when his friend arrived home. Then in the morning when they had breakfast, but the friend stayed in his bedroom and he didn't come back to have breakfast with the family. And then when this guy, when storyteller was about to leave, and he saw his friend Boots in the door, and he says like, okay, so my friend's still at home. I haven't seen him in the whole day. Something really bad is happening right now. And if you see the breaks, these cracks, it's changing how home, the meaning associated with it changes to panic, to something that is not measurable. It's a really intense emotional feeling of him calling for his friend, saying like, hey, are you here? You're still at home? And then just running towards his bedroom, trying to find him. When he saw him lying in the bed, saying, well, maybe he's asleep, and then he tried to call him, tried to communicate to him, no response. And then at the end, just waiting alone as a migrant for the ambulance in Montreal. And then the next part, which is him knowing that he needed to call the family of his friend to Senegal and Belgium and say, hey, your son has died in Montreal. So I like it, sorry, but it's still like shocking after many years of doing this, but that's a really difficult part of it. Like, and when I was listening to both, to Sebastian and Elise, it's something that happened to me, and maybe it's something important to share with the audience. When I was working at the first part of my project, when I was working with spreadsheets, when I was working with numbers, when I was coding the interview from a bit from afar, shielded by the map, I felt that it was not easier in technological ways, but easier in emotional ways. And then when you go towards this sensitivity mapping, it's hard. like I need to stop many times. I need to talk with Sebastian and Elise about what's happening, what my own process of listening to the story was affecting me as well. And then when I was mapping that, COVID arrived and I was just alone with my wife at Montreal, and I was like, oh my God, this is too personal to continue, right? So mapping is personal as well. Mapping is, it put us in the spot even if we don't want to. So yeah, there's that. And yeah, I don't know if there's another slide or not, but yeah, there's that.
Emery, you want to add
Yeah,
something?
well, just in response to the question of is home a place or is it a theme? And thanks, Jose, for that kind of segue into kind of what I'm going to get at. If you look at, do you have the screenshot of the new theme?
Oh.
Yeah, thanks. So if you look at Atlas Cine, obviously, so home is it's kind of this question of like place and space. Atlas Cine is kind of putting things in locations that are not even places; they're just like locations, right? But it attempts to kind of construct a meaning of place through this like geometric, architectonic like connection of a place, of a location to other locations, and to inform that place based on its connection to other places, which is kind of like an infinite loop if you think about it. But what's neat about the complementarity of an approach like this and like Elise's approach is that, yeah, it's like this scaling that is obviously not only spatial, made spatial with a tool like that, but a conceptual scaling and like a deep dive into pieces of a story, and using mediums that are appropriate to either trying to see the totality of a story, the totality of a multiplicity of stories, or trying to really understand and listen to pieces of a story that are obviously sort of can be targeted within the totality. It's a constant tension between trying to see as much as you can with a map and trying to see particular things. And all of this is reminding us of how important mapping is today. It's becoming it's like writing, right? You can all these different ways of mapping remind us of all that you can do with writing is possible with that language, and that mapping it really is today a synthetic language like writing.
Go ahead, Sébastien.
Merci, Emory. Je veux juste en profiter, Emmanuel. Je vois que vous vous rapprochez tout doucement. Si jamais vous voulez intervenir en français, vous n'hésitez pas, mais c'est vraiment comme vous voulez. Vous vous sentez très à l'aise d'intervenir ou de ne pas intervenir. C'est vraiment vous qui voyez. Vers la fin? Ok, parfait. Merci beaucoup. So, yeah, if you want to.
I guess we can touch upon the last theme and also opening the floor to everybody who wants to participate. But what we were touching a bit deeper in this idea of mapping debt and all those difficult questions, right? Do bring the very complex question of collaboration, and that's why I guess it's something that can be brought. I'm showing here a map that they just left, but my colleague Mathilde, who was part of the workshop of sensibility mapping, produced. And so in this workshop, we were asked to produce maps about listening the story of Emmanuel, but also about the process of being in this workshop and listening to the story and situate ourselves towards those learning experience, right? So, and at the end of the conversation, someone brought an idea that really stood out to me, the difference between comprendre and offrir, which is quite different. And in this case, particularly in the case of listening to Emmanuel testimonies about the crash plane, so the official political beginning of the genocide, but which is also referring to a very personal story from her. a participant of the workshop was saying that you can't understand, like, we're so, it's not our story, right? The Genesis is so far from what we've experienced. So as a stranger from this situation, you can't really fully understand. You'll never be able to understand. Matilda, I'm happy you're back because we're showing your nice map of the process you made. So you can't really, you'll never be able to fully understand the reality of another person as a certain extent, but you can't offer something at least. So this idea of creating those maps, and maybe it's related to the process you've been doing, Jose, but at least you're creating a certain conversation or a grieving process in your case. But at least, yeah, this idea of offering, which is distinct from understanding. So it's an open question if someone want to reflect upon this and maybe also bring different types of definition that you might have on collaboration, right? Because there's many ways of collaborating together, and it's a very complex question that I guess is at the central point of mapping of stories in itself and like human experience to a certain extent too. So if you want to share some thought on this idea of collaboration and the distinction between comprendre et offrir. So we're, yeah, the mic, I think it's already open.
Merci de m'accueillir autour de la table. Je suis assez accompagnée avec des amis très chers qui ont vécu une étape quand même dans ma vie parce qu'on a vécu ensemble au Congo, en fait. Et on est partis presque en même temps, donc voilà. Aujourd'hui, vraiment, je vais rebondir sur quelques thèmes concernant le récit. D'abord, c'est le mot subjectivité qui m'a encouragée parce que on peut pas être objectif avec ces récits. Pas du tout. Moi-même, ça m'appartient, mais je serai jamais objective pour dire est-ce que c'est vraiment ça. Donc, il n'y a pas d'objectivité. Merci pour le titre. Et puis, la sensibilité aussi qui m'a soutenue parce que c'est un travail académique, c'est un travail quand même assez encadré, mais je ne l'ai pas senti du tout au niveau de M. Kakar ni d'Élise. Je ne suis pas une académicienne, je ne suis pas, comment vous dire ça, il y a beaucoup de volets qui m'échappent parce qu'il y a la rigueur dans le travail universitaire. Donc, ils ont su conjuguer la rigueur avec l'humanité pour parler de quelque chose d'inouï. On parle de génocide, mais au fait, le génocide n'a pas de mots. Je viens de rentrer du Rwanda, donc c'est comme un récit qui continue. Des fois, la mémoire retourne en arrière dans les dessins. Ces dessins m'ont aidé à comprendre plus ou moins les étapes. Parce que quand on lit l'histoire du travail académique, ce n'est pas compréhensible. On arrive le mot que vous disiez tout à l'heure, comprendre. On ne peut pas. On ne peut pas. Il n'y en a pas du tout de compréhension. Mais ce que vous avez fait à l'université ici, c'est très important parce que on dit vous ne comprendrez pas, mais vous saurez. Il faut savoir. Mais le savoir qui n'a rien à voir avec la science. Parce que la science, c'est ce savoir. Donc, il faut faire la part des choses. On se sert des mots. À un moment donné, ça vient dérisoire. Et j'apprécie que ça soit dessiné parce que les mots, il n'y en a pas. On n'a pas encore trouvé de mots. Alors, comprendre ces récits, c'est toujours, on avance, on recule. C'est subjectif, vous prenez ce qui se passe, mais C'est-à-dire qu'il faut avoir quand même la foi dans l'humanité, dans le sens que un travail comme ça rejoint beaucoup de personnes. J'ai rebondi aussi pour les gens qui sollicitent encore d'apporter quelque chose à ces récits, de faire des chapitres d'autres universités qui sont intéressées. Et puis, comme ça se raconte pas, justement, c'est un travail pédagogique. Quand on saura plus ou moins à chercher à comprendre, il y a quelque chose qui est déjà fait. Et ces récits n'ont pas de fin, aussi longtemps qu'on est en vie. Et c'est ça mon mot vraiment de ma petite intervention. Au fait, ils m'ont donné la vie. Comment renier? Parce que quand on te fait des choses positives, c'est-à-dire la vie qui a été niée en faisant des crimes inouïs, quelqu'un qui te fait du bien, quelqu'un qui fait un travail significatif, il te donne la vie. Je suis là pour dire tout simplement merci.
Merci beaucoup pour ce témoignage. Puis ça me fait rebondir sur justement un des éléments qui sont ressortis dans l'atelier qui a été donné en écoutant votre témoignage. C'est cette idée que justement, à la fin d'avoir écouté l'histoire, ce point d'arrivée-là était nécessairement le point de départ pour autre chose. Donc, toujours une idée qu'il n'y a jamais aucun processus qui est fini, mais au moins il y a une forme de mouvement qui se perdure à travers toutes ces ça. Mais merci beaucoup pour partager. J'ai l'impression que de partir de cette expérience-là, ça amène, ça nous permet de recontextualiser de façon vraiment très concrète l'intensité des sujets qu'on amène ici. Donc, merci beaucoup pour partager ça. Je ne sais pas si quelqu'un d'autre veut ajouter dans l'audience. C'est des très bons mots. These were wonderful words to maybe as a closure, but it's also, the floor is open if you want to share something else. Mathilde, go ahead.
C'est difficile de suivre ce que vous venez de dire. It's difficult to follow. I feel like now what I had to say is less important, but I'll still bring something to the table because in my research right now, I'm also doing sensitive mapping with the participants that I'm speaking to, and in interviews, we are both doing maps. So I always bring papers and pencils of color, and we draw together, we map either the experience, so like the subject of the interview, or we map the interview itself. So we map our discussion, and I invite them to visually represent what is important, what elements are important for them in our discussion. And while I'm doing it, as I'm doing it right now, I've been thinking a lot about this process and the pros and cons, could I say, of that decision of doing 2 interviews, but I'm thinking about what we're talking about right now, and I feel like I want to bring this element to the table that the participants I'm talking to are the experts of their subject and of their experience. And for now, I've been finding it very enlightening to see the 2 maps after the interview side by side and see where we understood things the same way and what elements we thought needed to be represented both on the 2 maps and what is different and what I've been understanding and interpreting maybe the wrong way, or if I didn't understand something correctly. So I don't know where I guess where I'm going with this is that I've been finding it interesting to invite and facilitate map making by the participants themselves. And I guess that was my way of answering this difficult question for now, with what I had in my hands.
Yeah, at the end, both of the experience between Elise and Emmanuel, and also what you're doing in your research and Jose was creating also in his PhD. It's, I guess, just creating this space for a dialogue at the end, even if it's imperfect and not especially representative, but there's at least a conversation about what's going on inside us that is happening. So, yeah. Is there another, someone from the Zoom or the audience here that would like to add something? And if not, I'm looking at my other eyes. Do you see any? Yeah. If not, it's 1:25, so I guess it's we can just close up this conversation, and we do have like a 5 minutes of informal talks online or here in person if you want. We've been discussing a lot of things and also personal sharing, so we can just take those 5 minutes to relax and closing up this talk. I guess I would say also thank you everybody for being here with us and having this conversation. I was really honored to monitor this thing with all those wonderful projects that are going on. So yeah, thank you very much.
I wanted to add something, but maybe it's too late.
Someone is talking.
It's me, it's Leah. I'm sorry. I wanted to add something, but is it too late now?
As you wish, Leah. There's 4 minutes officially.
Est-ce qu'on peut le dire en français or is it English only?
Non,
On peut le dire en
Q&A
français?
en français, c'était officiel, ouais.
Ok. En fait, je voulais juste dire, parce qu'on parlait de la collaboration et on parlait de ouvrir un espace de dialogue et j'ai beaucoup reflété sur cette question par rapport à moi et mes collaborateurs autochtones et qu'est-ce que ça veut dire de collaborer avec des gens qui sont autochtones quand on est à l'université. Et pour moi, cette ouverture du dialogue, c'est beaucoup, en fait, le respect des frontières. Donc, en fait, moi, si je reflète sur ma collaboration avec ces personnes-là, c'est beaucoup à travers le non, en fait. C'est beaucoup à travers on va pas faire ça, on va pas faire ça comme ça. Si tu viens chez moi, tu viens pas à l'intérieur de chez moi, on se voit à l'extérieur. Donc, il y a plein de barrières, en fait, qu'il faut respecter. Mais en fait, ces barrières, elles sont pas négatives. C'est juste pour créer l'espace, en fait. C'est important de mettre des frontières pour pouvoir se mettre d'accord sur un terrain d'entente où la personne va se sentir à l'aise, en fait, et en contrôle. Donc voilà, c'était ça juste mes 2 cents là-dessus, que moi, dans ma collaboration, c'est pas du tout moi qui ai le contrôle. Au contraire, c'est eux qui ont tout le contrôle et c'est eux qui me disent en fait comment on va se parler, quel jour on va se parler, de quoi on va se parler, où est-ce qu'on va se parler. Et après, moi, je propose des choses et c'est accepté ou pas. Mais c'est vraiment intéressant parce que c'est pas... d'un côté, ça pourrait être vu comme une relation très compliquée, mais moi, je la vois comme une relation d'apprentissage plutôt. Voilà, c'est tout.
Merci Léa, et je vois que Sébastien en profite. Il y a quelque chose qui est arrivé dans sa tête.
C'est ça. Merci Léa. Non, mais je veux te remercier d'abord. Merci à Sarah d'avoir organisé et géré de main de maître cette session. Merci à tout le monde d'être venu et puis merci particulier à Emmanuel. Il faut quand même beaucoup de courage pour venir ici, pour venir jusqu'ici, jusqu'à l'université, jusqu'à la table, prendre le micro. Le sens en fait du travail de recherche vient aussi dans ce genre de relations qu'on construit au fil du temps. Et sans cette relation, ça perd quand même beaucoup de sens. Et donc, c'est important quand on travaille avec des récits d'arriver à créer un espace, des relations et du sens. Voilà.
Ah, mais c'est bon, c'est pas terminé.
Non, c'est terminé. Non, je voulais toutes les remarques qui ont été faites pendant la table ronde. Moi, ça m'évoque, en fait, les questions qu'on s'est posées, c'est comment parler, comment représenter le récit de quelqu'un d'autre, en fait. C'est ça. Et ce que ça me fait penser, c'est qu'on a une responsabilité, en fait, et que c'est ce que vient dire Léa, pour créer cet espace et le porter, et cet espace-là n'a pas vraiment de fin, puisque la recherche peut toujours être remise en question et le consentement aussi. Mais ouais, c'est ça. Je trouve que, enfin, je dis pas que c'est le mot de la fin, mais ouais, ça m'évoque ça en fait, que le fait de chercher comment parler, comment représenter le récit de quelqu'un, pour nous, ça représente ouais, cette responsabilité qui est aussi enfin, très positive aussi, dans le sens où elle construit quelque chose et une relation. Voilà. Merci en tout cas, Emmanuel, pour ton intervention.
Merci. Et ça va être le mot de la fin, je pense, parce qu'il est exactement 13h30. Merci.